welcome to start this time if you'd like.
Uh,
Change it up a little bit, or I can do it. Doesn't matter.
I think we're live now. Hello and welcome to another FinDepth Hangout. And this is the Week 2 preview of the Bills, where the Miami Dolphins will go to Buffalo, where the Bills will stay forevermore. And we've got a special guest along with myself and Ian. We have Joe Marino. So Joe, if you want to introduce yourself and where people can find all your work and follow you on Twitter, etc.
Hey guys, appreciate you having me tonight. Excited to talk some football with you guys on the field. Stay away from off the field stuff, I hope. You guys can find my work at buffalobillsmap.com and on Twitter at the Joe Marino.
And so I guess we'll start with, there's been quite a few changes in Buffalo, not only with kind of ownership now, but kind of both sides of the ball schematically and some pretty big moves. So maybe if you want to give like a brief rundown of kind of like the things you think are important kind of changes from what we've seen the last two times we played last year.
Well, one of the most significant changes is that Thad Lewis is not starting at quarterback, and who was the quarterback in the 2 wins last year. So E.J. Manuel gets his first opportunity to play against the Dolphins. Just kind of thinking 2013 to 2014, the Bills have 10 new starters, and three rookie starters in that. So it is a different team. It's not the same team that was played last year. Defensively, they're a little less aggressive, a little more reliant on that the front four that they have, which is really good, and a little bit more patient on the back end. Offensively, you're going to see a team that wants to run the football, which isn't all that much different than what we saw last year. But there's a little more diverse week one of what we saw last week against the Bears. Some more formations, a little bit more creativity, and allowing E.J. Manuel to throw the football down the field a little bit more than he did in 2013. So that's kind of the overall different look of the Bills this year versus last year.
And I guess like kind of a lot of people that don't really know the Bills, they were always kind of saying about how Jarius Bird's kind of leaving was going to be a huge kind of absence without really knowing kind of like Aaron Williams being kind of groomed to kind of take over and change that secondary a bit, so they're kind of less aggressive. How do you feel that's kind of worked out in the kind of brief glimpse you've got of that secondary kind of adjusting to a more kind of, we still saw kind of the nickel Roby blitzing off the edge, which obviously he sacked Tannehill twice and back-to-back that one game, which was pretty appalling. But so, kind of, if you want to talk about that kind of secondary and how that's kind of changed with kind of the big names subtraction.
Yeah, I think it's part of the NFL. Losing the system is not designed for you to keep all your players, and so Jarius Byrd is a product of that. And the Dolphins saw that with Jake Long. You can't keep them all. Salary cap is too restrictive, so you have to prioritize. And safety, while it's an important position in this NFL, it's not a position that the Bills wanted to invest any more money into, especially for what Jarius Byrd was demanding. And that's that. The whole situation, specifically with Byrd, was back and forth. But like you said, Aaron Williams was groomed to replace Jarius Byrd, and he's one of the better safeties in the league right now. I would say he's definitely in the top 15 or 20. And then you have a couple of guys in Denoris Searcy and Duke Williams, who Searcy plenty of time starting over the last couple of years, and Duke Williams, who is an intriguing prospect out of Nevada. You have a couple of guys that can fill in. You're not going to replace Jarius Byrd. He's too good. But when you consider his cost versus what he brings to the football field at this stage in his career, it was time to move on. It's a loss. You can't replace him, but maybe it's the type of loss the Bills thought they'd be able to manage well enough given the position.
Well, I guess kind of the two offensive lines and defensive lines, I think, are going to be kind of the main kind of talking points of this game, or at least with the lead up to it, with them both being the strength of both team and maybe the most turnover of both units are kind of on those offensive lines. So I don't know, how do you kind of feel about how it looked being in a four-man front, and also kind of looking at what Miami were doing to New England's offensive line, and how Seantrail and the kind of reformatting of the offensive line, how that will work out?
Well, the Bills' offensive line has three new starters this year. While Pierce moves from right tackle to right tackle to right guard. Obviously, the rookie Seantrail Henderson, the 7th-round pick, is starting at right tackle. And then Chris Williams comes over, and he's the left guard. And then the mainstays being Corey Glenn and Eric Wood. It's a group that it's concerning, not because they don't have NFL caliber starters at every position, but they really haven't played together that long. Corey Glenn missed almost all of the entire preseason camp with kind of an unknown illness. So that being said, you had Seantrail Henderson playing left tackle, and he's the right tackle now. So muscle memory, all of that's different. Then you have Chris Williams, who missed time in the preseason. And then you have Eric Pierce, who played right tackle, shifts inside the guard for the first time in his career. So you have all these pieces that are moving around and it hasn't had time to gel. That being said, the Dolphins' pass rush is just outstanding. It's probably one of the best 2 or 3 in the entire NFL. So when you think about an offensive line that really hasn't had time to gel, facing an extremely talented pass rush, it's definitely an area where Miami probably feels that they can win, and something Buffalo needs to be prepared to defend against.
I think this Seantrail kind of at right tackle against Wake, it's going to be really interesting kind of battles. I think something that is maybe underestimated with Wake is he's always facing right tackles, which are far lower quality of athlete than most left tackles. So I think his kind of disruption numbers are kind of inflated somewhat for that. But Seantrail is probably one of the better athletes at right tackle. But it's just whether Wake, he's obviously going to set him up for whether it's the inside rush or set him up inside and then go outside. And I'm not sure Trail's going to be kind of ready for that chess match. And I'm not sure if even Seantrail can play checkers, let alone chess. So I think that kind of mental aspect of the game might be where kind of we see as the game goes on and he's getting kind of set up on pass moves, is where we kind of see some sort of, as we did kind of with in the Dolphins' first week game, as the game went on, kind of more pressure became evident with bringing less people, only having had to bring 4 and you're getting pressure. So I don't know if Ian, if you want to talk looking at the Bills, what you thought about the defensive front against Miami's new offensive line.
It's ridiculous. I mean, I've said it many times. I'm going to keep saying it just throughout the season. I'm extremely impressed with the talent that the Bills have amassed over the last couple of years, and I really think if they had a little bit more consistent quarterback play, and not necessarily like an elite level, but I think if the quarterback play was a little bit better, I think this is a roster that should be recognized as the second best in the AFC behind Denver. I love what they've built, and it starts with that defensive line. Someone had started to kind of bring up a debate with me on Twitter about the Dolphins versus the Bills defensive line, and I told him, I said, I mean, honestly, I don't know how you really can tell the difference. I mean, they're both so talented. As much as Miami brings to the table, has just as much firepower. You've got Mario Williams going back to the 4-3 end. Just an incredible athlete. Like, when you look in the history of the NFL, Mario Williams has got to be in that upper tier of athletes all time. Just so strong, just ridiculous. Just everything he does is just ridiculous. He's such a smart player. Watching them against Chicago, you saw some breakdowns against the run, at least some opportunities to do a little bit more. But it wasn't Mario Williams, that's for sure. Everything he does. I just think is so consistent, and he's a tremendous player. Marcel Darius, a fantastic nose tackle. Kyle Williams might be one of the best 3 or 5 defensive tackles in the league right now. Just all along that defensive line. And then what they've done with Jerry Hughes to be able to get him in the position to succeed after the Colts dumped him for nothing. It's really impressive. Miami's going to have a tough time, and it's especially because I thought New England was going to be a challenge enough, and they did pretty well against New England. Brandon Albert had one of the best games. I went back and charted all of his plays last year when Miami signed him as a free agent. He had a better game last week than he did for the Chiefs in 2013. So I thought, I don't know if it's health with him, I don't know if it's scheme that's really worked for him, but he looked really good, and he and Juwan James are just going to have to ball out this week for Miami to be effective passing the ball, because they rushed so few times with their back seven that, and then they were fine with it. Like, it was very impressive to watch them work against a good Bears defense or offensive line. The Bears have done a lot and put a lot of resources into reforming that line, and it didn't really matter. Cutler was still pressured, I would say at least, I don't know, a third of his dropbacks. He saw a defender. I mean, it's very impressive to see that in today's NFL when the talent is so spread out, like Joe was talking about. I mean, the guys are meant to leave, and they've really amassed a great amount of talent. So I think the key will be inside with Darius and Kyle Williams. I noticed Vince Wilf work a lot. He got a lot of pressure on Samson Sattel, and then eventually Belichick moved him over off of the tackle, and then when he lined up inside again, Shelley Smith had a lot of problems with him as well. I think Williams and Darius can kind of bring those same type of issues, interior pressure on the Dolphins, and then it'll be up to the linebackers to kind of clean up Noshawn Moreno's cutbacks. So it's definitely, for me, that's the matchup of this game, how Miami's offensive line does against that defensive line, just because Buffalo is just so ridiculously talented there.
Look, I think it's something that we've kind of seen that's been kind of talked about a lot over the last week is kind of how the Dolphins have used zone read to kind of make a hat-on-hat football in kind of the way in which Chip Kelly has kind of done, but at maybe a faster tempo than Dolphins have. I think we'll see kind of that as well. We've seen that kind of, to a certain extent, with the Bills using that kind of zone read with E.J. Manuel. So I think both teams can have quite a lot of success kind of running that inside zone off zone read. And I think, particularly with both teams' linebacker trouble, with Preston Brown having to start now 2 weeks in a row, with Rivers being out for the Bills, and the Dolphins pretty much scraping a barrel, with Ellaby and Missy both out, and Jordan Tripp probably out as well. And maybe it's McCain maybe out as well. So there's 4 potential players, or
I think he was
back today.
I think he was questionable.
Okay. So I think, and then maybe if, Joe, if you want to talk about, I guess lots of people maybe watched the first week with Bills and looked at the linebacker core and kind of were rightfully maybe unimpressed. But maybe if you want to talk about the Bradham coming back from suspension and what that kind of brings to that unit, his range and ability and coverage.
Yeah, the Bills linebackers are interesting because the skill sets don't complement each other well. Nigel Bradham being back is a very big deal. He was one of the most impressive players this preseason, and Coach Marone's really praised him as probably the most improved player on the team. He's always been very physically gifted, but understanding the mental aspect of the game and getting his reads down, getting in his run fits has been a struggle for him, but that really seems to be cleaned up at this time, and so it's a very big deal for him to be back. Now, when you watch the Bills last week against Chicago, kind of the front seven in general, I'll say one of the concerns that happened during the Bears, why the Bears was able to have some success running the ball, is because the Bills did a poor job of creating levels in the run game, meaning you had one guy get too much penetration, and then you're reliant on these linebackers to be able to fill these windows. And when you don't have great range at linebacker, which the Bills did not last week without Bradham in, you're relying on Preston Brown and Brandon Spikes, who are both not plus athletes at that position, to fill these windows. And so by creating too much penetration, they created levels in the run game, and Matt Forte is just an outstanding outstanding running back that made him Bills pay a few times. So looking at this Dolphins run game and watching that Patriots film and seeing how well the Dolphins' offensive line was able to sustain blocks and cutback runs from Miller and Moreno, the Bills are going to have fairly sound gap integrity and very sound in their run fits to be able to stop that run game. Speaking directly to the linebacking core, like I said, Brandon being back at weak side linebacker is a big deal because he can cover, he can run. Spikes will be spikes. He'll handle basically B gap to B gap. And then you have Preston Brown, who's that strong side linebacker this week, which is a better fit for him. You know, it's not as reliant on his ability to run as so much as it is to play and keep things in front of him and operate well in small spaces. So I think this week it's a better lineup for the Bills with Bradham back and Brown going over the strong side. But if they don't keep their run fits and allow for the Dolphins to sustain blocks and create cutback lanes, it's going to be a problem.
Maybe we kind of talked a bit about EJ Manuel and throwing the ball a bit more vertically down the field, and obviously a great tool for him is kind of that receiving core that had, well, Robert Woods in particular, a huge catch radius, and then see the large investment of picks into Sammy Watkins. What are you kind of expecting? I guess you're just wanting to see the same again, and maybe a bit more of Sammy Watkins' explosion in space. Is there anything else you're kind of looking for that unit, or is it more on EJ Manuel to get them the ball in ways in which they can make plays in space?
Well, I would default to Doug Whaley's comments this week, and he said in an interview that the game plan is for EJ Manuel to throw the ball 20 or 25 times a game, and only have to make a handful of throws, to put them in position to win games. So this is a running team. They passed the ball, I think, 23 times last week in an overtime game. You look at Joe Flacco, who did 60 pass attempts. So the Bills are a little off script right now with the way that their offensive philosophy they subscribe to. That said, EJ Manuel played winning football against the Bears. He made some big time third down throws down the field, throwed with pretty good anticipation. But I don't think that's how you beat the Dolphins. I think the Dolphins, you need to be able to hit some things timing wise, hit some things where in quick game, which is not something we've seen really from EJ Manuel. So that'll be interesting to see if they adapt their game plan to be able to attack the Dolphins that way. But EJ Manuel doesn't get enough credit for being a smart quarterback. Okay, we all know that he has struggles with his accuracy and just overall consistency with his mechanics. But he pretty much, for the most part, goes to the appropriate place with the football. So he did that well against the Bears. His accuracy was improved, and we'll see if that continues against the Dolphins.
Is there anything, Ian, you're kind of looking at matchups, particularly between the Bills wide receivers and Dolphins quarterbacks, kind of how those two kind of match up against each other, and where you think there could be a particular advantage one way or the other?
The Bills receivers definitely give Miami a unique look. The Bills have kind of built a receiver core that's similar to most college programs that recruit very well. I think I remember back when Marrone was hired, he had said something about bringing like a track team to Buffalo, and it was really interesting to hear that, and they've really been able to build that. You look at Sammy Watkins, Marquise Goodwin, those guys are they're tremendous mismatches for any cornerback. Even for a guy like Brent Grimes, like he's going to be facing Watkins, I'm assuming, for most of the game, and unless if they put him in the slot, which is a huge advantage for Buffalo if they can get him in the slot. Watkins is one of those players, and some people didn't feel this way before the draft, and I understand, but Watkins is one of those players where it doesn't really matter who he lines up against. He's the better athlete, and he's a more dangerous weapon no matter who he's facing. So he's going to be a challenge for Miami. He's a guy that you have to always know exactly where he is. The Bills like to spread horizontally and then work in layers, almost, I mean, similar to Miami's new approach, actually. And I think that what they can do with him with the intermediate game is going to be, a big Bills offense and how they succeed this week. Miami's going to have to devote a safety over to Watkins just because he's not limited to any type of route. He can run anything. He can get open. He tremendous hands, speed. I mean, he's literally got everything. So he's the total package for them. Robert Woods, and it's funny, as much as I praise Sammy Watkins, I think Robert Woods might actually have the bigger week this week. His route running killed Miami last year. The quickness on the underneath routes, the precision, it's always going to be a huge mismatch for a team like Miami that likes to play in off coverage. Woods can just run a 9-yard comeback, and he's so strong at the point of contest that he can just take the ball away from Finnegan or whether it's Grimes. I mean, as much as those guys, as good as those guys can be, the offense has the advantage, and especially with a player like Woods. And then, I mean, they're a deep team too. Mike Williams, I think he was an amazing acquisition from Tampa Bay. I don't remember if he did too much last week, but off the top of my head, but I mean, he's definitely a supremely talented player. 6'4", 6'1", but he's big. I think he's like 215 or so. Just a girthy guy, and that type of size is, like I said, Miami's a short team. Most of their cornerbacks are underneath 5'11", smaller types. The safeties, I'm assuming Rashad Jones isn't going to play because he hasn't practiced in a while. So I mean, if that's the case, it's going to be difficult to bring these guys down. They're all very tough. They bring unique skill set from all over the place, and Miami likes to kind of put them on an island. They might have a deep safety out there, but if it's Jimmy Wilson, he's yet to be really tested too often in deep coverage, and that's definitely an area where Miami could be vulnerable. So playmaker-wise, the Bills are loaded at wide receiver. It's very young talent, but that's not necessarily a negative. It just means that they're not as proven. So Miami's going to have their work cut out because they can easily make a mistake. You miss a tackle. We saw it in the preseason. Jimmy Wilson misses a tackle. Mike Evans goes into the end zone. They're at risk for that big time this week. Sammy Watkins and Robert Woods and Mike Williams, those guys are so hard to bring down. They're going to have to be on top of it. They're definitely they've got their work cut out for them this week.
I'm curious to kind of get your thoughts on your tight end group, James. I always find it strange that Greg isn't used more. I think he's a really interesting talent, and he run blocks really well for kind of a tight end with more diminutive size, almost kind of the Charles Clay-like thing. So why do you think he's not utilized more, and what do you kind of see coming out of that group, or are you kind of just that's not really part of the game plan, they're just inline blockers for the most part?
Well, let's keep in mind that the Bills' leading receiver last year was Scott Chandler. And the Falcons game last year, Scott Chandler had some significant mental breakdowns with a bad fumble and drop. And ever since that game, he's really not seemed focused. His concentration has been poor. He's dropped the ball. He's had some poor penalties that you wouldn't expect out of an experienced veteran like himself. So I think the Bills want to feature Scott Chandler more, but there's questions about him being a reliable football player right now, in my opinion. Now, like you said, Chris Gregg is a plus athlete. Nothing that he can't do. He has no physical limitations. He's very talented. That said, that's not materialized into making plays in the NFL. Part of that is he's been buried on that depth chart, which is confusing as to why he would be, considering the players in front of him are Scott Chandler and Lee Smith, who don't really offer much. So you'd think that he could create some matchup problems if used, but he's just not used.
Yeah, I've always found that really bizarre that he's kind of just been rotting. But I think he would cause a really big issue, I think, for Miami. That's one area in which we've kind of seen countlessly, and kind of that was in the Patriots' game plan, was to try and attack Gronk or Bright early and often, and just kind of that timing wasn't really there. Gronk kind of looked a bit slow and rusty. But I think that's somewhere I always kind of look at a matchup with the Dolphins is who are they facing at tight ends, and that's always somewhere I think we can get abused with this current linebacker core, even though Jelani Jenkins looks good in coverage. I think he's kind of, I've always saw him as a nickelbacker, so we're kind of putting him on the tight end the whole time. I'm pretty comfortable with him in that situation. We've started to use, it looks like Jamar Taylor just as to cover tight ends. Pretty much every single snap he's had in the NFL has been covering either Gronk or Jimmy Graham. So he's had pretty tough 60 snaps or so in 2 years. And so I was wondering, is there kind of any other thoughts either of you two have on the game, or maybe we could go for some predictions of either individual performances or who might win an individual matchup or something like that. So Ian, if you've got any thoughts on the matchup or predictions you want to make?
I mean, nothing too bold, really. It'll just be fun to watch. I mean, this is a game where Miami last year, I feel like Dolphins fans really felt like they shat the bed, and just every which way. I mean, especially the second matchup, the team just seemed so unprepared. And it was such a big win last week, and really a win that happened despite so much going wrong on the offensive side of the ball. So many mistakes were made that, I mean, are easily correctable if people just execute. And there's going to be mistakes made. It is what it is. It's the human element. Passes are going to get dropped from whatever. But there seemed to be an exorbitant amount last week. So, I mean, if I were to predict, I think Miami looks good. I do think Miami can pull away with a victory here. It's just I think the X factor is EJ Manuel. I thought Manuel missed a couple reads last week, and Joe's right. He is very smart. He protects the ball very well, and I think almost to a fault. And that might be just me and how I like my quarterbacks. I saw a couple throws that he didn't throw and didn't want to thread the needle on, and that's understandable. I think against Miami, he's going to have to make those throws, and he's just going to have to fit it in there. These teams are just so similarly matched that the quarterback play is probably going to determine it. If Tannehill plays another first half like he did last week, Miami could be out of it early. Buffalo's defense is just a lot better than New England's, a lot more opportunistic. I think the corners are a lot more, not more talented than Darrelle Revis, but I mean, if Gilmore and McKelvin are both playing, which I don't know if Gilmore is playing, but it's just a lot of talent on every level, and Tannehill's got to be really careful. And if Manuel can put together a good game, just get the ball out to his playmakers early, let them work in space, especially on like that second level with the linebacker situation. Could be a long day for Miami. I would predict that Miami does win, though. I would guess like 20-17, something kind of close.
Joe, have you got any rough predictions? You don't have to give a score like Ian, but kind of anything you think or you kind of can see being a mismatch or opportunities for either team?
Well, to Ian's point about the Dolphins' mistakes, the Patriots made a lot of mistakes. Miami was very opportunistic multiple times in that game, given blocked punt or fumbles or really bad situational penalties. So I think this game might also come down to which team is able to capitalize on some mistakes. I think when E.J. Manuel gets sacked, because that's going to happen, he's going to have to be smart and protect the football and not turn those into fumbles or turnovers. So in protecting the football, but at the same time staying aggressive, I think is going to be important. I think this is a good opportunity for Sammy Watkins to have a breakout game. When you look at what Seattle was able to do with Percy Harvin and the Vikings with Cordero Patterson, I can see Sammy Watkins doing similar things, getting the ball in space and letting him go. So the Bills' ability to get the ball to their playmakers, like you said, is going to be what they do after once they get the ball. I don't think this is a good week to play Buffalo. A team that is coming off of a difficult road win over Chicago, so they're confident, obviously. The crowd's going to be as insane as ever. I mean, this might be more insane than 90 playoff crowds. With the sale of the team, the Ralph Wilson tribute before the game, Andre Reed and Jim Kelly are supposed to make an appearance on field. So you're looking at a very difficult atmosphere. It's never easy in the NFL to win football games. I sound like a coach, but it's really difficult. But I just feel like there's so much momentum in the Bills' favor that I think that they're going to pull off an emotional win. Close, but I think the Bills are going to win. And then actually another thing is that the Dolphins are road favorite. I mean, there's so much emotion involved in this game that I think the Bills will have the edge.
Yeah, I mean, I've like when I pick games, I just always pick the Dolphins no matter what. But I mean, the way I kind of show if I'm confident or not is I'm not putting any money on this line. I think it's way too. I think it's going to be pretty much like it's a 1-point game. I think either way, it's going to be that, or one possession game. It's going to come down to kind of what happens at the end. It's going to be who has the ball and who executes at the end. I think that comes down to. I think your point, Joe, about kind of like the Patriots playing badly. I think the Dolphins also got a lot of flags when they were kind of stumbling in that fourth quarter and third quarter, and that kind of in quite a pivotal drive, and they got a couple of flags that got them first downs, and that kind of put the game away. And it would have been interesting to see kind of whether defensively they could have held on still as they were the whole game if they were kind of put under any kind of pressure with field kind of the Patriots having a bit more time, a bit more scoring opportunity, or a bit better field to start with. So yeah, I haven't. I think it's going to be a one. Yeah, it's going to be really close. I've got a feeling that the Dolphins aren't going to run as well. I think, or what I think we'll see the Bills do is they'll crash that perimeter defender and let Tannehill run a couple of times and call his bluff, because the Patriots didn't do that once last week, so they kind of took a man out of the box and let Marino and Miller run against 5-6 man boxers, which is if you do that all day, you're going to get 4 or 5 yards every carry. So it'll be interesting to see if the Bills do kind of call that bluff, and whether they either just attack Tannehill or attack the running back and kind of make Tannehill make a harder decision, whereas kind of the Patriots just sat off and kind of did not, just took a man away. So I think that would be kind of an interesting kind of dynamic, and how kind of EJ Manuel, who we saw kind of that same kind of zone read, but EJ was much happier, or they're much happier to let him run. Obviously, he also kind of, I think there's a couple of times where I saw where he would get to his second reads and then just start using his athleticism more as well than we kind of saw Tannehill ever do. So I think that could maybe be a deciding factor, which defense allows athleticism and which kind of takes it away, and how that kind of plays out in regards to playing hat-on-hat football. And I think that will be quite an interesting deciding factor as well, who runs the better as well. I think that would probably be. I can see the Bills running really well, and even if the Dolphins stack the box, that's why I think it's going to be really close. But yeah, I'm not putting any money on it. I'll put it that way. So maybe, unless there's anything either of you want to kind of bring up, I mean, I guess we can talk about the kind of latest news of Rashad Jones and Dion Jordan are no longer suspended, so they could play, but with no kind of preparation or time is probably quite unlikely. Perhaps we see Dion kind of as like a third down rush specialist in certain situations, and with kind of Randy Starks being on and off the kind of injury concern, that would allow Olivia Vernon or Derek Shelby to slide inside and kind of give some relief and to tackle in those kind of nickel situations. So that's perhaps what we could see there. And I mean, it would make sense to have Rashard Jones on that active roster. He can play special teams. You don't really scheme a huge amount for special teams coverage. And that would be relatively easy to do on the sideline. Just go through a couple of like things they see and communicate it. And then it's like you want to have your best athletes around. So if someone goes down, I would rather be playing Rashard Jones and Sammy Seamster. So I think if it comes down to that, that's kind of what you're kind of looking at. So perhaps they'll be active, but how much we see of them will be interesting. And then as we've got you on, Joe, we may as well take an opportunity to extract some of your draft knowledge. So I saw you talking today about Malone, the Oregon linebacker. So are there any kind of other, maybe if you want to talk about what you saw in his game and maybe his comrade Walker, and obviously he's been drawing comps to Kiko, who you're missing weak side linebacker. Is there kind of, so maybe if you want to talk a bit about those pairings and kind of elements of the game that have intrigued you and any other prospects kind of at the top of the board sort of intrigued you in that kind of area?
Well, speaking to Derek Malone, who I just watched this evening, I took the day and studied senior outside linebackers, and so he was like the 11th or 12th one that I had watched, and outside linebacker is just becoming a difficult position to evaluate because you have so many players that are playing 4-3 defensive end with their hand in the ground, and I'm trying to see traits that are translatable to standing up in the NFL. You look at guys like Vic Beasley or Zach Hodges or Genoa Grissom, C.J. Johnson. All these guys are 4-3 defensive ends in college. And I'm trying to watch these guys and evaluate them as 4-3 outside linebackers, and they've never done these things. So I finally pop in the Derek Malone tape, and it's a stand-up 4-3 outside linebacker, and it was just refreshing to see a guy that can, play off the line of scrimmage and run around and react and be physical and cover and rush the passer. And so I might have been a victim of the moment, but I was really, really happy to see a 4-3 outside linebacker playing 4-3 outside linebacker in college. So he stood out, obviously. Joe Walker's really had a tremendous start to the season. The Kiko comparisons are easy. They look the same and they play the same. And Oregon defense has a handful of prospects. They have another linebacker, edge player, Tony Washington, and Eric Armstead. And obviously, we know about Ifo and Trey Alamu. So they finally might have the defensive personnel to keep up with their offense.
Yeah, funny thing.
Are there any kind of, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to pile on the Oregon train. I was charting every snap of Ifo the last couple of games, the first two games, and I didn't really see much of Joe Walker their first game. I'm not sure if he didn't just play much or what the situation was there, but against Michigan State, Walker and I thought Troy Hill, the other cornerback across from Ifo, I thought those two were tremendous. Of everyone that stood out to me, those two guys actually stood out more than Ifo and some of the other players on defense. Malone, I haven't checked out a whole lot, so I'm definitely going to go back and look for him. But yeah, Walker's definitely impressive for Oregon. Around the country, sorry, if we're going to go around the country, go ahead.
I was just going to say the Pac-12 is just loaded with defensive talent, and I mean, I think like Washington's loaded, UCLA, so it's a really good conference at the moment for kind of pros, kind of caliber defensive prospects. It'll be interesting to kind of see them all come out kind of in the same kind of time periods. But yeah, you can go ahead, Ian.
I was just going to say, because I also watched Marcus Peters, the cornerback for Washington, and then I was going to go into Shaq Thompson.
Oh, Shaq Thompson. Okay.
Yeah. He's going to be interesting to watch. Like, I love his physical ability. I love his talent. I don't know I think it's the defense. Watching their defense, they just seem to be such a mess. they've got the talent. They've got the defensive end or outside linebacker too, Kikua or something like that. Um,
Yeah.
he looked pretty solid. I like what I saw to him. But he and Thompson, they've got Peters, who's a fantastic cornerback, and then they've got Danny Shelton, who I wasn't terribly impressed with. But just as far as talent, I don't know if it's the scheme or if it's just Thompson. If he doesn't have the recognition ability, Thompson is definitely one of those guys. I think he's going to be like Shazier. People either love him or hate him as a linebacker prospect because he's kind of like that safety linebacker. He's kind of small, 6'1", 228. Is what he's listed at, and you can tell because he doesn't really bring guys down on first. He doesn't jar them back. Sometimes he kind of gets dragged along. And then looking around the country, I'm really interested to see a little bit more of Wilson out of Georgia this week. It definitely faces a tough matchup against South Carolina. He's kind of slow. He doesn't seem like he's like the quickest guy underneath in coverage and stuff, but at least as like a run stopper, he seemed decent the first couple weeks. And then, like you mentioned, UCLA, Eric Kendricks is another guy I want to watch this week. Kendricks has been a playmaking machine in his whole entire career at UCLA. He's similar to Thompson, though, 6 foot, 228, similar measurements, but I think he might be a little bit more well-rounded than Thompson overall from what we've seen this year.
Yeah, Hendricks is definitely one of my favorites. He's probably my top inside kind of guy at the moment. One player I was really impressed with last week, but not so much when I saw him in person, was Mike Hull, a Penn State linebacker. And I saw him in Ireland, and he was maybe just disappeared, or maybe I wasn't paying attention, but he didn't really stand out at all. But then the next week he was just everywhere in a similar way to Walker, just kind of like every play he seemed to be there. I think it was basically the whole drive he just stopped on his own. And so I think he could be a really interesting player. He looks kind of quite rangy, he's got some wheels to him. I think he could be an interesting pro prospect as a senior at Penn State, and obviously everyone kind of knows their kind of pedigree of linebackers. And then I think there's going to be some interesting guys that people are going to want to like, or there'll be people that like them, but no one really will, like DePriest, and I don't really like AJ Johnson either, and they're just kind of like big school guys, kind of big frames. So I don't know if either of you kind of have any thoughts on them, and maybe even Perryman, who's kind of got a big frame. He's a bit more instinctual, I think, a bit more. He can get downhill and kind of find hole. He makes kind of more plays than the other two do. But I don't know if either of you have kind of any thoughts on. They've been names we've kind of been hearing banded around for a couple of years now as well. So Joe, if you've got any thoughts on either of any of those three guys, or have you not really?
Well, I can talk about AJ Johnson, who I think it's fair to say the previous 3 years. I mean, you're talking about a limited range and limited ability to cover, and I don't know how closely you guys follow my draft philosophies, but I'm a box checker, and I like to hit doubles. I like to hit consistent doubles. I'm not much of a risk taker. I want to see on film things that is translatable to the NFL. Too many times we're reliant on these young kids to quite honestly transform and do too many things that they've never done before. So A.J. Johnson specifically, I thought improved so far through 2 games. I actually watched all of his games against Arkansas State and Utah State. So a bigger test this week against Oklahoma. He'll be tested more, his ability to run and compete and show that he's fluid enough to compete with a great team in Oklahoma. So we'll see if that continues this week. I've been impressed to start, but I'm not going to overlook two years of lack of range because I saw him play a couple of the games against Utah State and Arkansas.
Yeah, I agree. I had Johnson as like a late round guy. For people that don't know, Joe and I are actually, we probably agree most on Twitter for pro people, more than anybody that I know of. Very rarely do I fall in love with like the kind of like the guy that flashes as opposed to like the guy who does his job. Guy, stuff translates, but I mean, you can kind of know what to expect out of the guy. More of like that doubles approach, and I love that philosophy. I mean, I want to know what I'm getting out of a guy. I thought that Johnson. I agree. The last couple of years of Johnson weren't too impressive. I think I had him looking at my thing like he's like a late round guy. So if he improved the first 2 weeks, that's definitely a huge boost to that defense. For DePriest, I didn't like DePriest really what I watched of him. Just kind of looked like just a guy out there, a good college player, but I didn't really see too much that I think will work too well in the NFL. He just kind of slow and just not a whole lot of versatility there. Perriman gets all the headlines. Perriman is kind of similar, I thought, to C.J. Mosley, but a lesser version. Inside the tackle boxes, he's good. He's pretty good. He doesn't have that burst. He doesn't have like that really good burst through the hole. He's not going to make a ton of plays in the backfield. He's going to make the plays probably from the line of scrimmage to about 3 yards. So he's going to rack up tackles. He's going to be a good statistical player. I'm not sure he can do much in coverage. He seemed a little lost every time he dropped back in space. Not a whole lot of lateral agility, at least to cover guys like in the slot and in that role. He's probably a second-round guy for me right now, from what I've seen. The guy that I love, and I'm not sure he's a true inside linebacker, is Benardrick McKinney out of Mississippi State. You talk about guys, and I fell in love with his athleticism. He's the one guy that I think he could become one of the most fantastic players out of this draft class. I don't know if either of you guys have had a chance to see him, but he's 6'5", 225, extremely fluid for his size. Great length. I mean, the things that he can do physically, not a lot of other linebackers can do right now. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to check him out. He's raw though. I mean, he doesn't finish plays especially well. He's kind of like the I guess he goes against the grain for what I look for usually, but it's an interesting inside linebacker class though.
He looks kind of he kind of has like a Levante-esque elements to his game where he can kind of he has enough athleticism to stay off blockers, and that's, I guess, is that you see so many people get like these rangier linebackers that we're seeing in the league, smaller kind of faster ones, but they don't really have that quick twitch in their hips to actually get away and keep clean. And it's kind of that's, I guess, why Levante is probably the best linebacker in the NFL at the moment, because he can play with the bigs by just negating them. So I think he flashes that, but then, I don't know if he can play inside. I mean, I'm kind of very conservative when it comes to who I want to play middle linebacker. I need to see them being able to disengage. Otherwise, you're kind of having to funnel people one direction. You're changing kind of everything you're doing for that to kind of have a limited middle linebacker. So I'd rather have that kind of athlete at will and like let them be free and run around. And I think we see quite a lot of kind of fans get frustrated by that kind of like the more athletic, the more kind of celebrated prospects are all going to be will linebackers because they're more athletic and smaller and faster. I think that's just something people have to deal with. And it's what NFL teams are showing us they want to do. So in a certain extent, you have to kind of look at the trends of the NFL and accept those as the realities, and they're not investing a huge amount in traditional middle linebackers, as we saw with C.J. Mosley's. Of course, he had some injury issues, but 5 years ago, 10 years ago, he would be a top 5 prospect, and he fell further than he normally would because of what the NFL looks like now. And Ryan Shazier would have never been drafted in the first round. He would have been in the second round, like Levante David was. And so that we're kind of seeing this shift towards the will linebacker being a more desirable player. The attributes are harder to find, therefore their draft status or the necessity to draft those athletes higher is needed because of the need. I don't know if maybe we can quickly, before we go, if there's kind of any particular matchups you're looking for this college weekend. Obviously, it's not as maybe as illustrious a lineup as the past 2 weeks, but maybe Ian, if you've got any games you're keeping an eye out of and any players to look out for.
Yeah, I think the South Carolina and Georgia game has a ton of intrigue. Obviously, it's the only game this week where we have ranked teams playing. But the South Carolina team, obviously a horrible showing against Texas A&M. That's not what they wanted to put out there. And then you see them play against East Carolina, and they played a tight game with East Carolina. Pretty much the only reason they were able to escape was because they had a 10-minute drive in the fourth quarter to go up by 10, in what was a touchdown game. And so now they're faced with Georgia. And Georgia's coming in off of a bye. And South Carolina has had 2 lackluster showings at home. Now they're at home again with Georgia now. So I think you're going to see a focused South Carolina team that's as talented as Georgia, but are not playing well. And then you have a Georgia team that's rested off of a big win against Clemson. And you have a lot of talent on that Georgia defense. And it'll be interesting to see how some of these players like Ron McWilson, like Drake Drew, like Leonard Floyd, Damian Swan, how these guys match up against a really talented South Carolina offensive line. Obviously, Brandon Shell, Corey Robinson, A.J. Kahn, all nice NFL prospects. And then Mike Davis, who's just outstanding. Obviously, he's not quite as good as Todd Gurley, but if you like those fire hydrant, battering ram type running backs that actually have a skill set to them, that can see the field, that have upfield bursts, can run with pad level, Mike Davis is exciting. To see him in that offensive line against that talented Georgia front seven with Jerry Pruitt as the defensive coordinator, that's going to be a fun game to watch. Everyone wants to write off South Carolina, but I think they're going to show up ready to play.
And Ian, have you got a particular matchup and players you're looking out for tomorrow?
I think definitely that game. I think that game is a much watch for all football fans. You guys kind of touched on Oklahoma and Tennessee. That's going to be an interesting one. Bob Stoops always seems to take it personally every time he plays an SEC team. I actually put a little bit of money on the over line on that one. It's only at 57. I think that one's going to get a little. I think it's going to be crazy on both sides. Honestly, I think both sides are going to be scoring a ton. There's so much offensive talent in that game. That's going to be a really fun game to watch. Oklahoma has some really good prospects on their team. Trevor Knight, led by him at quarterback. But then Tennessee, they've got a lot of younger guys that aren't draft eligible on the offensive side of the ball. So, but I think the game I'm going to really pay attention to is UCLA and Texas. Texas is definitely undermanned with the way Mac Brown left the program, and then Charlie Strong has kind of cleaned it out a little bit, and I definitely respect what he's doing there. But in the short term, it puts them in a tough position. But UCLA is, I think, a team that overcorrection is going to happen, and actually has happening. They were very highly rated. As I saw them rated as high as number 3 by people entering the season, which is just ludicrous. I mean, their receivers, offensive line, running back situation it's awful around Hundley, and I feel like Hundley he's very inconsistent. I'm not a huge Hundley guy. However, there is something to be said about when you have less than 2 seconds to throw the ball, and when you're throwing to really poor receivers, it goes both ways. There's got to be a medium in there. And so I think Texas has a terrific defensive tackle prospect and a really good defensive end. Defensive tackle Malcolm Brown, and then a defensive end is, I think, Cedric Reed. That's just going to be a really interesting game, and see how UCLA can kind of overcome their limitations on offense. Defensively, they've got a ton of talent all over the place. Young guys, the linebacker core could start for the Dolphins tomorrow, and I would be so happy. But yeah, it's a pretty weak Saturday. Oscar, are you watching anything for a special tomorrow? I know you're a Pac-12 guy.
Well, yeah, I was going to say you stole my UCLA one. So they've been kind of interesting. The first week they looked really great defensively, and then offensively they couldn't do anything. Then against Memphis that was scoring every play, and then Memphis was scoring every play, or every drive, and it was just so it'll be interesting to see if they can put together kind of like a more rounded game, whether they still need to rely on like Miles Jack for running touchdowns, and or whether they keep him at linebacker. So I'll go with maybe Central Florida against Missouri. I guess could be quite interesting. I think Central Florida looked pretty good. I really like their corner Jacoby. When I saw him in against Penn State, he picked off Hackenberg, and he just has really quick, clean feet. He's really aggressive. He's a bit undersized, but kind of looks good and can play in kind of those cover 6, cover 3 defenses where you're playing off quite a bit. He's a really good athlete. And I think Missouri, obviously, they always have great defensive line prospects, and they just kind of turn all over. So I think Central Florida could surprise people there. I think Penn State are better than most people think, or kind of as their kind of, maybe it's Hackenberg won that game. So I think you see, I think Central Florida are close to being a ranked team, so I think this could be an interesting game and maybe an upset. So I'll be watching out for that one. I'm trying to think what else.
Indiana and Bowling Green is another interesting game early on.
I was going to go Duke, Kansas. There's this one linebacker from Kansas. I think is it Ben Heaney? He looked pretty interesting. And then Duke, I think. I like Anthony Boone. I know, Ian, you were talking about I think comparing him to Boyd as being kind of a system quarterback, and I think I will agree with that. That he works really well in that system, and
yeah,
I think he will be an NFL player, not necessarily a starter, but I think he will find his way on to be a good 6-7 year veteran as a smart player. You see, and I think he may even warm Peyton Manning's seats for a couple of years, just sitting next to him or something like that. So
Pat Devlin was in the league for a couple of years, so I mean, yeah. Boone's definitely more talented than that, so there's definitely a chance.
So unless anyone else has some thoughts they urgently need to get out, it sounds like that drug thing hasn't been agreed, so maybe we don't need to worry about Rashad Jones and Deion Jordan. But who knows, the NFL is just melting. So hopefully the NFL will still exist after the Bills game. And we'll have a review podcast, Hangout. And I think on the site now is Pablo's preview for the game. So make sure you check that out, and I've drawn every single Dolphins offensive formation and pre-snap motion, and so they'll be up on the site tomorrow morning in my beautiful handwriting. And so make sure you check out Joe's work. He's constantly filling Twitter feeds with scouting nuggets, and off-season, he's a must-follow for all his content, and I guess you can follow me, and Ian's pretty good. I think everyone follows him already. So have a good night, and enjoy a good weekend of football.
I have one hot take for you.
Okay, let's go. Let's finish on fire.
On Anthony Boone, okay, and this is being strong-worded here, so just deal with it. Taj Boyd is 3 times the NFL prospect that Anthony Boone is. Anthony Boone is going to be one of those players that gets a tryout in a mini camp during OTAs. So I don't think you're going to see him on an NFL roster at any point in his career.
I will say I do think I lean more that way, and the reason why is here's why. I was so stupid last year. I literally evaluated enough college football quarterbacks, senior quarterbacks, to where I was watching Tommy freaking Reese, and I was so angry at myself after I did it. I watched like a game and a half, and I was like, why did I go this in depth? I watched 26 quarterbacks last year, and so I think around 10 were drafted. So way I come out on Boone is I can name off 10 quarterbacks better than him, like, snap of the fingers. So I would lean more towards Joe on this. So it'll be really interesting as we go through this year and then next year to kind of see how that, we're going to have to come back to this because this is really very interesting of a topic.
Boone played high school football at my alma mater about 10 minutes from my house. And so I watched this kid play high school football, and my mind was blown that he even had the opportunity to play college football, let alone being recruited by David Cutcliffe. And then to see him get, like, playing time and stuff, like goal line over Sean Renfree and stuff, and then now he's, like, a starter for the team that won the Coastal Division. My mind's been blown because I just don't think he has any ability. But let's let it play out, and we'll talk about this again in a few years.
Okay, well, the Dolphins were 0-2 last year to the Bills. Hopefully we don't go 0-3.
Well, it's already,
hey, at least that is starting.
We've got at least we've gone with the field, so me and Ian have, so we've got it covered either way. Oh, thanks again, Joe, for coming on, and you're welcome anytime. And it's nice to not have the Pats on the top. Either way, someone will be 2-0 in the AFC East, and it won't be the New England Patriots. So it'll be some good news, whatever happens. Right. Thanks everyone for watching, and good night.